Our first plenary takes on one of the most consequential questions in American higher education right now. How do we harness the power of cross-sector partnerships to tackle the grand challenges we face? In these hyper-political times, with the pressures every public institution is navigating, this is not a theoretical question. How do we collaboratively work with our funders to navigate these treacherous waters and deliver on our mission? We've assembled a group of people who are grappling with that very question from very different vantage points. So let me introduce them. First, we have Ruth Watkins, who is the president of postsecondary education at the Strada Foundation, which focuses on strengthening connections between education and employment. Previously, she served as the 16th president of the University of Utah, where she drove record degree completion rates, expanded research funding, and built deep community partnerships. Naila Suad Nasir is the president of the Strada Foundation, which funds education research nationally. Before joining Spencer, she was the Vice Chancellor of Equity and Inclusion at the University of California, Berkeley. She is also a member of both the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Education. Stephanie Banchero is the director of the Education and Economic Mobility Program at the Joyce Foundation in Chicago, which seeks to close income and race disparities in college and career success through equitable access to high-quality education. Prior to Joyce, she was an award-winning reporter for the Wall Street Journal and the Chicago Tribune. And Jason will be moderating our conversation. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Deneen. Sure. Thrilled to be with you all. Hope you had a great lunch. I hope you rejuvenated. You got some energy back. We had a great morning with our speakers, and I know we're going to have a great level of conversation this afternoon. As President Jones discussed this morning, universities are navigating a period of profound transition. Public confidence is under pressure. Questions about value and affordability are growing, and the demographic shifts that we're experiencing are reshaping the students who we serve. At the same time, expectations are rising. Institutions are being asked to do more to drive workforce development, to fuel innovation, and contribute to solving complex societal challenges. We're delighted to have our speakers here to dig deeper into these issues, to really help us understand what are the important ways in which we can partner together to tackle grand challenges. So we're going to start with a bit of a lightning round, some quick questions. And then we'll dig in a little bit more beyond that. But in a very relevant way, and Robert this morning talked about this changing narrative or this changing relationship between the federal government and higher education. We saw a lot of disruption last year in funding. We've talked earlier about funding disappearing overnight. What was one thing your foundation did to respond to that disruption?
Am I to jump in?
There you are. Yes, please.
Okay. So I think I'm one of those people that knows a lot of you. You do not want to be on your phone because I'm going to call on you. So be ready.
Oh.
And yes, because it's post-lunch, and wouldn't that be tempting? So you don't want to do that. I would love for you to think about, throughout all this conversation, how can philanthropy, and many of us bring many more tools than just check writing to the table, how can we help you with the things you're trying to work on? So what did we do under pressure? One of the things that Strada Education does is try everything we can to strengthen the connection between education and work. We have stayed on that in as nonpartisan way as possible. Because when I saw Chancellor Jones's slide, you can think to yourself, what from that slide, like I would be very interested in what you think about this, what the slides were most compelling to you. To me, the one that broke my heart was that almost half of the people of the University of Washington as a state did not see anything that the University of Washington could do to help them or their family have a better life and better impact. That is striking. What Strada's been doing and has kept doing is say, what can we do to make that different for as many people as possible?
Great.
interesting to think back to this past year, because it has been quite a year. We fund education research, so we are in a world where many of the federal sources of education research funding are effectively dried up for scholars across the country, which means we've seen this huge influx of proposals, and we're trying to figure out how to manage it, how to maintain our commitments, how to get money out the door because people really need it to do research, to do knowledge building, to build careers. So I'm just going to say two things in violation of the one thing rule. One, we double down on continuing to fund equity research. We have a program that's called our Racial Equity Grants. We kept that. We did not change the name. We did not clean our website. Well, we did take some things down. But we did not strip it of equity language. And that felt really important, both substantively, that scholars who do work that has deep commitments to a society that is equitable and just really were the ones targeted around grants that were canceled. And the second thing that we did in the wake of the National Science Foundation grant cancellations, we created a really rapid bridge program to offer scholars $25,000 if they'd had an NSF grant canceled. They didn't have to write a new proposal. They sent us the original proposal along with the cancellation letter, and we turned that around within a couple of months, so people had money to close out their grants with respect.
Well, I'm going to violate the rule too then and say two things, but they'll be quick. I would say, I'll say tactical and strategic. Tactically, we increased our payout. So how much money we were putting out each year, we increased it. And we loosened the regulations around grant reporting and what you could use the money for, because we knew everybody was under stress. And then to build off what you said, we only invest in public policy, and we focus on racial equity, and we did not back away from that, and we said we are not backing away from that. Like, we made it very clear, this is what we're doing, we play the long game, and we're sticking with this.
Great, I've already lost control of this conversation. You guys are taking your own direction. Ruth's going to moderate here in a moment. So be prepared, right? We might be calling on you all. But another quick question. What's one area where philanthropy could have the greatest impact working with higher education in the next decade? Maybe we'll start with Stephanie.
I think this whole idea around the narrative change, I know it's sort of like, what does that even mean? We were just talking about, like, I think the narrative has been lost. Like, the value of higher education just as a good for economic mobility, but also as we need it for a thriving democracy, the narrative's gone, and I think it's really hard to get a narrative back. We were talking about, like, Tylenol or Jack in the Box. Like, once you've lost it, so I think that's how philanthropy can help. Those are things we can lean in on.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm struck in the conversations this morning and in your talk, this notion that we have to reimagine. We have to do things differently. We have to figure out how to get out of the silos, how to stop doing things just because it's the way we've already done them, and do new things. Well, that's really hard to do. And I think one of the nice properties of philanthropic capital is it can be experimentation capital, right? It's a way to try things out, see what works, think about what you might want to scale, and then invest in more broadly. I think that's a great function for philanthropy, to be that place to support that experimentation.
So President Jones told us we need to meet the moment. What is that moment? I think in my bio that Deneen just read, she saw a statement that said how proud, I guess, I am that we did much to change completion rates at the University of Utah. So I'm going to own this too. When I think about what is the moment now, why are people coming to us? Why are they investing in us? What are they looking for when they get there? On the one hand, for an era in higher education, we talked a lot about access. Access remains important. Then we shifted to say access without completion is quite hollow. And now I think we're at another shift, and that is to say student success doesn't end at graduation. Why are people investing in us? To get access to a set of careers, jobs, and livelihood that they would not otherwise have without this investment. And you are looking at me and saying, but aren't we doing that? And I could say, yes, and there is more we can do. A not insignificant number of people do not get the outcome that they came for. Even at every kind of institution in the nation, they are not working in college-level jobs post-completion. And I think with that, the economic boost that people are expecting. Now, there's another thing you could be thinking right now, and that might be what happened to Ruth Watkins, and the Ruth Watkins we knew and loved, who was the Dean of Arts and Sciences, right? And I think you could say to that, of course, we know, I'm not saying that those fields don't matter, that knowledge and application of knowledge and the opportunity doesn't matter. But I am saying, unless you hit a certain economic threshold through your investment, most of the rest of those positive things do not happen for people. And instead, you have challenges that stay with you. People are coming to us for careers, for opportunity, for economic stability. I think the shift is for us to think, yes, access, yes, completion, and now we are in an outcomes era. How do we move in that way?
So let me pick up on a thread across all of this. And Stephanie, you talked about the narrative, right? We've lost the narrative. And I think each of you have talked a little bit about that narrative, that perception of higher education. One of the slides that we saw this morning talked about a poll right at the University of Washington. And when the poll said, what's the value of the University of Washington? I'm going to make up the data, Robert, I'm sorry. It was 40% said that it was high value. When they reframed it and they said, okay, what about a debt-free education from the University of Washington? It went up 20 points, right? How they framed it, the narrative changed, right? And how they asked the question. How do we work, how does philanthropy and higher ed work together to change the narrative? What's that opportunity look like?
You changed the question on
I did change the question on you. I pulled an audible.
Let me ask my chat bot.
I think one of the challenges is that higher ed is siloed within and amongst itself in many ways, disciplines, institution types, geographic regions, all the things. Foundations are siloed, different sizes, different missions, private versus public, all the things. And then our relationships with one another can be transactional. You need some resources, you come to us. We sometimes have it, we sometimes don't. Sometimes what we think our strategy is aligns with what your strategy is. We've been doing this work with scholars about their research and arguing that if you're gonna do research that matters for the public, you need to be working with the public. And not just after you have the findings, who could use these, but actually at the construction of the research project. So the parallel here is, if we're gonna be having true partnership, we need to construct the agendas together rather than shoehorning one another into each of the agendas. And I think that's relational work, that takes time, that takes commitment to really being partners. And I think one of the things for me that I find so odd about the transactional nature is, like, if you're at a foundation, it's not your money, it's not mine. I made none of the money. Like, I just happen to be stewarding it. And so the idea that we're on different sides of a table is a false construction. We actually need to be on the same side of the table, figuring out what we do with the capacity of institutions and resources. What can we do together?
It was so well said. I think when you think about what we do, and we each are a little bit different in where we focus and how we deliver that work, I think everything at Strada is about strengthening the connection between education and work, between education and career for more learners. And so when you all have ideas about that, we would like to be partners with you in that. We would like to support you in the development of that. We would like to use that. We have a primary research group, the evidence-based elements that would help drive that, the advocacy and policy side of that as needed. So this is a little bit different than thinking about an organization where you would come for a check, then we would not see each other for however length of time. I think this is co-constructed, as wonderfully explained, on a shared mission and with some of those, what are we trying to do here? I will say, my colleague Kimberly and I had the most refreshing lunch with Chancellor Salgado today, where we essentially did this in a conversation of saying, what are we all trying to accomplish and how could we construct this together? And then I said to Chancellor Salgado, how could we help you at Strada? And he did not say, I'll take $1 million today for this showing up at this lunch.
He would, though.
Yeah, and who could blame him? But instead, he said, I'd like to help, I'd like to do this in some way with you. I'd like your thought partnership, your involvement, your engagement. And I think that's exactly the sort of thing. It is true, we need to be working on the same ideas. And that should be fairly clear. You should be able to know who are the best fit. And hopefully later in the conversation, we'll talk about how we can work more effectively together too to make this easier for you. So you don't have to mold yourself to 25 different philanthropy opportunities, but instead to say, we actually share some priorities and are going to work to share more priorities.
Oh, that's great. All right, how do we move beyond the transactional to actually working collaboratively on the same side of the table? Stephanie, you're a former journalist. You brought up the narrative. How, we'd love your wisdom and thoughts on this. How do we recapture the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew, I'd get paid a lot more. Like strategic communications, like they make a lot of money. I mean, I would say one thing that came to my mind that I think is really important is like I think we could listen together. I think there just isn't enough listening. We all think we know. I'm one of those people that think, here's your strategy. You're doing your thing, and this is what the research says. This is what I think we just haven't listened to people enough. And philanthropy can help people listen. I mean, we can pay for those sorts of things. But I just think if everybody did a little more listening, I think maybe we could figure out a better path forward. Because I think people feel like they're not being listened to. Like you're not, it's unaffordable for me. I am telling you that. Like you need to listen to what I am telling you. And even if I get there on a full scholarship, there's no food. I have food insecurity, housing insecurity. So I think maybe starting with like, hey, we're here to listen, and then we'll figure out the solution together would be my suggestion.
I love that, not going in with the answers. All right, I'm going to go back on script now. But Ruth, at Strada, you've talked about it this morning, a real focus of yours is on strengthening pathways into education and collaboration with the workforce. What do you see as where is the most opportunity for collaboration with higher education in improving pathways and collaborating with the workforce in the next decade?
Yes. So I would just talk a little bit about some of our areas of focus that I think have the greatest opportunity to help move that forward. These are empirically based, so there's research evidence behind them. And when also driven a little bit by the voice of learners. What are people telling us they need and they're looking for in the spirit of listening, right? One element of that is people are trying to figure out what pathway will pay off for them and what they're looking for. That education to career guidance is absolutely critical. How am I supposed to get there and which of these will work? Clarity around what it will cost me. We heard that from President Jones very clearly. The perception, and Washington is a quite affordable state that has invested a lot in higher education, and still that perception of this is not possible for me. The survey showed the greatest support and responsiveness to people when they could see that there was a way for them to get there. Clarity around cost and transparency, a work-based learning experience that is paid. The most life-changing experience. And then I would also really say connection to employers. Without a strong connection to employers, it is very difficult to make this work. And I think a lot of the innovation will be around paid work and learn. And that can be campus jobs. That can be, I think the ability to get this in the hands of the students who have been the furthest from opportunity is really the most important thing. There you can think about Pell recipients. We cannot ask students to do one more thing. We need to embed it in what they already do. Those are some of the things that I think we have incredible opportunity to collaborate on and can really help drive change. You are innovating. Higher ed is innovating in this area around the country, committing to measurement and staying with it enough to see the impact that it makes. Quite important.
I appreciate that. Some of you know I do work in systemness and thinking about collaboration, and I think, how do we reframe this question, which is stop asking how students are failing, instead of asking how are we failing students?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you're going back to the learner, because too often we put the onus on them. They're doing something wrong within our structures that we created. But it's really about how do we restructure ourselves to meet their needs at this time. Now, your foundation funds educational research, and the research that improves education systems and expands opportunity. How can philanthropic investments in research help universities not only generate knowledge, but also translate evidence into policies and practices that meaningfully improve education systems and societal outcomes?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So I was thinking about this morning because I feel like we hit on the knowledge building function of the university, but we've been talking a lot about the teaching and workforce preparation function of higher ed. And as a researcher, but also as somebody who cares a lot about innovation and societal growth and advancement, and I'm watching countries around the world lean in on increasing their research heft, because it is a strategy to advance and create economic mobility. So I guess all that to say, the knowledge building function of the university is really, really critical. And we have had the luxury for the bulk of that 100 years that President Jones talked about, of being at the cutting edge across fields in the United States. And that happened through the investments that we made as a country in the indirect rates. Yes, the indirect rates are high, and also it was a part of a contract between the federal government and the universities to say, we value research innovation. It matters for all of us. And so I guess I think there's something important, one, about recommitting to that and seeing the long-term benefit of staying on the cutting edge technologically and with respect to research advances across disciplines. And two, we do have an obligation to ensure that we do a better job as research universities and as researchers to make sure that the applications of that research, that those findings are usable, right? And that they are used. I think we've been leaning in at Spencer about it's actually not just enough to do the study and have the findings and hope someone picks them up to make the world better. We actually need to be doing that work ourselves, which you spoke about that this morning around engaged partnerships. And we think that is in many ways a part of how we show our value as universities to the public, because they will see, well, I was in a partnership with this professor or this research group, and there were tangible outcomes to that work that I can feel and see in my children's school, in my community. And so that model feels really, really important. We've been funding that. We're now moving into thinking about, okay, it's great that we're funding people and research groups to be in collaboration to do research that is used and usable. And what would it look like if we actually trained PhDs to know how to do this, to know how to engage in community, to know how to frame research questions alongside folks who could actually make use of the answers to those questions. So I think there's great promise there, and it's something I'm personally super passionate about and really excited about the possibilities. There's also a bit of a movement across the country around this and across foundations. There's an initiative that the Pew Charitable Trust is running that's a funder collaborative called the Impact Funder Forum, where they're pulling together foundations and in some of their activities, university leaders as well, to talk about what's the university infrastructure we need to support this kind of engaged research across fields, and then how do we as a funder community support folks who are doing this work. So it's an exciting time.
No, it's great, and we're going to get back into that in a minute, this sort of collaboration piece. Could you give us an example of what it looks like to work with researchers to translate their work into real-world findings?
Yeah,
and impact?
So we so many examples. We funded a project that I love to talk about that is about school desegregation. And so we think about school desegregation, we think about like 1952 and the Brown versus Board of Education, and then all the deseg orders that happened across the country. Well, at that time, of course, we were taking white communities and black communities and figuring out how to bring kids into school together. It was a way of thinking about what are our aspirations as a multicultural society. Well, society looks really different now. So we funded this project that was kind of saying, okay, when we started these deseg plans and orders, we were a black-white society. We are not anymore. We're a multicultural society. What does it look like to approach creating multicultural school communities in a world that's much more diverse? And so they created these, it was a group of researchers alongside a couple of district leaders and educators, and they hosted these kind of roundtable discussions with community members and educators and young people and researchers to talk about what they wanted, what they were after. And then they went back and created some options around, well, what kind of DSEG plans, what could that look like? And then they vetted those with folks, and then they went back and tinkered a bit more. And then a couple of the schools took them up and started to try them out. So it looks like that kind of iteration and keeping multiple people at the table through the research process. To build things people need.
Not just at the end.
Right.
I hear you, right? This isn't transactional.
Yeah.
This is bringing them to the table,
Yeah.
having real-world conversations.
Yeah.
All right, we've talked about sort of innovations and funding particular activities within the institution, with our faculty involved. We haven't talked as much about policy, right? The policy frameworks. And Stephanie, your work at Joyce, in part, is about policy. And how do we change policy? What are you seeing in terms of policy development, and how do you work with your fundees?
Fundies. Grantees.
Grantees.
Fundies. I'm going to start saying fundies. So I'll give a couple examples of where it's worked really well. I think the most obvious one, I think what comes to people's mind is how philanthropy and universities and the field worked together was the overhaul of the FAFSA form. Like that was a real, I mean, the field was hearing from folks here like, this is too complex. Students are having a problem with it. There's a lot of research done, funded through philanthropy, done by maybe even folks in the room. And then philanthropy funded like the technical assistance. Okay, what should this look like then? And then there was funding around the advocacy, and ultimately the thing got changed. I think that's like the most direct line. I'll pick one other example that's a little bit, we have a very broad view of policy, so systems change would be policy for us. And I'll point to our friend Juan Salgado here, Chancellor Salgado. We fund most of the philanthropists in Chicago that fund around education have been funding for many years Chicago public schools to work with city colleges to create smoother pathways for students. And that involved like not an insignificant amount of money to bring people to the table. And then recently, University of Illinois just joined in through funding to say, okay, now let's make that into a 4-year path. So getting the K-12 system, the 2-year system, and the 4-year system together, like that's what philanthropy can do. Like it's not easy to do that, to bring people together. You need money, you need time, and that's where philanthropy can lean in, but you need willing partners. And I think that's one example of how you can work together.
That's great. I want to go back to FAFSA for a minute, because that was a pretty intense period of time. And I think it relates to our period about how do we change narratives. In the previous role I worked at, I was getting calls weekly from James Kowal and Nasir about working, right? How do we make this work? How do we work collaboratively? And the problem was the narrative, right? How do we get the narrative out? And philanthropy really did step up to say, all right, how are we going to fund institutions and systems to communicate to their stakeholders, right? Because we need to get this information out. A, it was delayed. B, it's changed. C, you can still get the money. Right, but it worked. Were there any lessons you saw from that we could take away about changing the broader narrative in higher ed?
We need more James Quall. Like it matters it matters the leadership matters. And James, and you guys probably were on these calls, he was pounding philanthropy to, we need help, we need you to support this, now we need implementation help. And like but he had long-term relationships with philanthropy. So I think leadership matters, relationships matter. I actually think it's the relationship part of it. Like we had, all of us probably have worked for a long time with James. We trusted him when he said, I need this. We were like, okay, how can we help?
That's, there's a great, I think, lesson there, right? The trust that he built had been built over time.
Yeah.
So that when he needed it, he could deploy it quickly. And so I think it's also about, again, it goes back to the long-term work that we do, right? These interoperators are folks that are important. But you just can't step in all of a sudden and say, I need a change. It was because he knew philanthropy.
Right. Not to be too crass, but I'm going to be crass for just 1 second. In my days as a reporter, like Arnie Duncan was a great example. Arnie Duncan would love to talk to reporters, but you had to kind of work him behind. Like you had to talk to him like almost every day before you could then get him on the phone to get a quote from him. It's the same way with philanthropy. Like if you just call me and say, I need $1 million, I'm like, okay, well, yeah. But if you're Counselor Salgado, who spent all this time working with us, and now, spent all this time working with us, when he picks up the phone and says, I need this, I'm like, okay, I know because I've worked with you, we've built a relationship, and you don't get the money on, he didn't ask the $1 million on the, you just,
Yep.
so
But it's not scalable, right? Is it? Because I mean, everybody in this room starts to call you every day.
call her.
But I think you have hit on such an important thing, and it came up in the faculty discussants this morning, that trust and relationship element is every bit as important for us as it is for people in the institution. And the way it happens with a different policy or practice will vary by state and place, and we need to figure out how to do that with you more effectively.
Right. But not one-on-one, I guess is my point about it not being scalable.
I think though you'll see the effective models emerge that then you can share with communication. I'm thinking about work that we've been doing in the state of Louisiana that started with them having a Senate resolution to have a task force on career navigation. Why? Because they're distressed at the fact that so many of the people that earn a degree in Louisiana leave the state. Maybe it's workforce and economic opportunities. Maybe it's our people getting degrees in areas that we need in the state of Louisiana, any number of things. As they studied this, one or more of our representatives from Strada were there with them at every single one of those task force meetings. Now they have legislation in front of their Senate, the Senate Education Committee. They ask that we come and testify in support of the work they're doing and the recommendations they're bringing forward on career navigation. It is not convenient, it is not in the plan, and we need to be there. Because otherwise, what kind of credibility or value are we adding to the real problem they have today?
That's a great point. I'm going to dig into this collaboration piece a little bit more. Before I do that, just a reminder, if you have questions, please write them down and hold them up, and our team will grab those because we want to go over to your questions here in a moment. But as we've heard, our foundations often fund very similar issues, but they often work independently, which can create a fractured and non-aligned environment for those receiving the funding. How can we strategically work to align philanthropic strategies across organizations so that we can achieve larger impact?
And there are a group of us that are funding in post-secondary education along the lines of that I described about what we do. And my colleagues have done such a good job of saying, if you want a partner, you want to build that partner from the beginning. It does not work for me to go forward and say, I've got a great idea, people, and we're all going to join together and fund my big idea. Instead, we have to say, what do we want to do and where do we share common ground? And then let's go together to make that happen. I see that happening with Gates, Lumina, Strada, Ascendium, ECMC, Joyce. This is important. If we are sending you all in 25 different directions, this is not effective impact. We have to do that work informed by you on the front side and then come together. The other thing I think that's helpful, and we've done this in a number of cases, there's a good idea happening at a big system of higher education. Now I want that to happen, not even for the 250,000 students that system will impact. I need that to happen for the 20 million people across America. So if we're going to do that, we have to have system thinking and sustainability from the beginning, and that will need us to collaborate. But not late at the end of the party, because people don't really want to join that.
Yeah, good point. I feel like, you all correct me if this is a misperception, but I feel like one of the gifts of the pandemic was that funders started meeting together more. Like, we're a part of more funder networks. Now, we haven't gotten to the what will we fund together, but I think we're at the, well, what do you do? And what do I do? And what's our shared thing? And I think there have been some new pooled funds that cropped up in relation to the political, the shifting kind of political environment and the anti-equity work. So there's a higher ed pooled fund where we're all putting a little money in because none of what we're funding is exactly anybody's one thing, but there's a collective set of priorities that we have around supporting institutions that are doing good work in this political moment. And I can think of several examples of those kind of funder networks, including one that happened about a little bit over a year ago,
that was in reaction to the administration, the federal administration targeting the law firms and then targeting higher ed and picking off institutions one at a time. And philanthropy kind of got together and said, wait, they're probably coming for us next. Like, let's figure out how we lock arms and how we make sure we know that if they come for one of us, they come for all of us. And I think and it started with that, right? The self-protective, like, we want to make sure we're okay. But where it has evolved to is, I think, a much broader network that is about how we support infrastructure, how we support the stewarding of democracy, how we take up these big collaborative collective questions that none of us would be taking up on our own. So I think there's some of it starting to happen, but I don't think it's at the level of what you described, Ruth.
I think there's something that's going to come out soon. Yay, from some cluster, so watch for it.
All
about
right.
You heard it
innovation.
here. A big announcement is coming.
Let's
All
hope.
right.
Or at least some kind of announcement. So
The only one I would, two things. First of all, I think this question of scale is like the question. I think scaling things, and especially with fidelity, like the implementation is where things always fall down. And like funders love to meet, so like yes, more meetings. We love to have our meetings. The one thing I would add is that like if you think like 30, 40, 50 years ago about how philanthropy generally engaged with higher ed, it was around like funding buildings or endowments or scholarships. It was more that kind of philanthropy, at least in education. The education philanthropy is way more strategic now. Like we have a strategy, we're working through it, and that's how I think it's easiest to engage with universities. And I've seen universities engage more in that type of thinking around the access, affordability, completion, value question. Like it's way more strategic thinking. We're partners. That's just how the philanthropists think now, and it's just a different. It's not like it was 30, 40 years ago.
I'm glad to hear that's evolving. And I've been doing some work last year with sustainability-focused funders, and we've got about 60 funders around the world, from venture capitalists to foundations to national science foundations, all coming together in a conversation about how do we do this work to drive sustainability solutions forward. And it was fascinating to me because it's sort of a new area. It felt like the funders were as isolated as higher education is, or as siloed, right? They all do their own thing in their own way. Yes, we're having conversations. And one of the things we've really talked about is how do you hand the ball from one lane to the next, right? Because if we are thinking about the funding, I just look across here, Spencer is funding researchers on the ground, doing research, understanding how to transform higher education. Strada is thinking about how do you scale the work that our researchers are doing, right? And then Joyce is thinking about the policy frameworks that are in place. I mean, is there an opportunity at some point to get where we can actually be more strategic to say, all right, you're funding our faculty to go out and do the research. Strada figures out how to pick some of that up and actually scale the things that work, and then Joyce creates the policy, helps create the policy framework.
In our mind, we do that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you'd all agree, but I don't know how you.
yeah.
I mean,
Sure,
thoughts?
sure. No, and I think among us there are several who are doing some version of policy and advocacy at different scales, and the teams that are working on those things are working together, because ultimately you have to think of policy as a major scale tool, right? It is the way you get there, a way you get there, and so that is quite important. I also think some organizations that are doing philanthropy are funding primary research. So if we have a particular question that we think is absolutely critical, we don't have the research bandwidth in our in-house team, we are going to look for researchers out there in the field to support. So there are lots of points of alignment among us, and then the other cluster that are focused on better higher education now.
Yeah. Could we get to a point, though, where NALIA does the research funding?
Yeah.
And then somehow it gets handed
Somebody
off to
picks it
Strada,
up.
or
Yeah.
somebody picks it up
No,
to.
I think it already probably is happening.
Yeah,
It's just that we don't
informally.
always know.
Yeah, I keep wrestling with the difference between. That does happen sometimes. Like we have funded scholars, and then when they're ready to scale up their projects, we've made a warm intro to another funder, and they've gotten technical assistance there to turn it into, like, it happens. It just doesn't happen. There's not, the structures don't exist to make it happen systematically.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what you're getting at.
Now we do, this is probably like invasive philanthropy if they made a word for it. But like if we're funding an idea that we think is big, important, and has scale, or somebody's brought us. There's a project now called CUNY Beyond at the the City University, and SUNY is doing elements as well. I'll use whatever relationship, social capital, trust, whatever it is that I have, to call my friends that are investing in similar areas, have people come together, join a virtual meeting, learn about this idea, and then I can say to people, here's why we're making this investment. Here's why we think this has value. It's something, it's sort of like fundraising for other rather than fundraising for me or my organization. And I think that is something that philanthropy in the New World Order can and should and must do. Because otherwise, we each know about a piece of this patchwork and we don't even necessarily know what each other are doing.
No, I love that, right? You're trying to convene a table to bring people
to
together.
help bring a good idea to life
Yep.
that will need scale and that ultimately will need the state to step in and support.
That's,
Which is
we won't
now-
even get there
yeah,
yet, but that's the next
yeah.
stage of the work.
I mean, that will ultimately be the long-range sustainability plan for that work to be taken up.
Stephanie, any thoughts on this collaboration piece beyond what you said?
I don't think there's anything more to add. No.
So thank you all for the questions. I'm going to start off with one. I asked about how philanthropy and higher ed can work together to reshape the narrative. How much of reshaping the narrative requires us owning the parts of our promise that we have not delivered on fully?
I want to start off on this one because I've been having a little bee in my bonnet about it. So part of what's happening now around the narrative is that there's some things that we haven't done well as a sector that people are noticing and taking issue with. And part of what's happened is a concerted movement from the right to discredit universities and kind of intellectuality in general. So yes, we need to do better, and we need to acknowledge the ways that we haven't done well, and we need to acknowledge that some of this is a manufactured crisis based from a group that has a very specific set of intentions and aims and values. And so it's why I think your point about a narrative campaign, that both of those things need to happen in concert. One, a set of narratives that the public can have an alternative perspective on other than the very organized, concerted one that's happening from the right, which is you can't trust them, it's all bad, look at how terribly they're fudging things, wow, we need a new set of stories, and we need to continue to get better. And the sector has continued to get better, actually. Even if I think about how higher ed philanthropy used to be so focused on the top research universities and now spreads much more widely across the sector, I think we are, in general, recognizing, and we meaning society, the value of the multiple types of institutions and all that various, the state colleges, the community colleges, the small liberal arts, each has a value to offer in this space. And the narratives about the inaccessibility are also fed by the fact that more and more people are applying to college, which is a good thing, right? I'm a UC Berkeley graduate, and the admissions rates from the time I applied, first of all, I'd never get in, right? But the admissions rates were probably 30, 35% when I applied. They're 9, 10, 7, 8% now. That is partly because we have increased the notion of access through progressive financial aid policies, through the Pell Grant, to open up college. And so I think we just have to hold it in balance a little bit. Sorry, that was long.
I guess the one thing I would say, and again, I am not a specialist in strategic comms. It is very difficult to do. The only thing I would say is maybe just flipping is, it's not like acknowledging your past wrongdoings or whatever, but putting out a positive vision and okay, this is what you think, but let me tell you what the positive vision is. I work a lot in K-12 too. I think it suffers from a similar problem, which is we're just constantly fighting back. It's like you've got to put the positive vision out. And I wonder if maybe just not acknowledging the wrongs, but saying to your point, look, these are the positive things. Don't get caught up in the negatives, or put a positive vision forward. Again, I'm not a specialist in this, so people may roll their eyes at that, but that's what I would do.
So I'm getting to where I have a lot of practice at this because this conversation in one form or another happens a lot of places. I get to talk a lot to presidents and chancellors, often in a closed door kind of situation. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the data about what's actually happening to bachelor's degree graduates, where they work, what they earn, how many are sort of having what we assume is the realization of their promise, and then point out some of the places where we could do better. And the first hand that will go up will inevitably, at least it used to be this way, it's starting to change, would be, no, Ruth, no, you're wrong. We need to tell our story better. You need to help us tell our story better. We are great. We are great. We deliver better than any of the other options. And I think the problem with that approach is we've been doing it and trying it. And obviously, I think the gap on the listener side, or maybe we're supposed to be the listener to what people are telling us, is really, that doesn't feel that way to me, and that is not my lived experience. So I also agree that a long period of we've wronged people isn't going to be helpful here. I think it is going to be important to say we are listening and we are making commitments to do better for America's students in a set of very specific areas. We are committing towards these actions that will translate to better. There isn't going to be a lot of gain to spending time in the negative place, but instead to go to, this is what we are going to do. Radical transparency and clarity on cost. Every student can have a work-based learning experience. Everyone has the right to expect that there will be someone in that institution helping them navigate, and that someone has considered something about what the workforce opportunities and needs are, and they're telling me about that early in my experience. These are not crazy things for students to ask for, but I think we do probably want to lean in toward who's willing to say that they're going to make that kind of a commitment, and then to say it proudly and to figure out the journey it'll take to get it done. Because I think short of that, we sound very unresponsive and not listening, and half the people in our states might not see a place for themselves of value in our institutions.
I think that last part is really important, like this, where do people see a place for themselves? And it strikes me that you mentioned K-12, Stephanie. I think there's a trajectory here that we have not created K-12 environments where everybody connects, where everybody belongs, where everybody gets to experience their best self, gets to be at the edge of their learning. And so higher ed then becomes this elite experience, and elitism and belonging don't necessarily go hand in hand. And part of what we're seeing is that disconnect between how regular folks see their lives and their priorities and what matters to them and what they think higher ed stands for and what happens there. And that creating more spaces for more people to belong feels like a really important part of this story.
There's something in what you said, I think, Jason, that might be a little bit of the difficulty that we're having navigating that question, and that is that once in a while, there are these situations where some people feel like in order for them to win, you have to lose, or there has to be a defeat. There has to be, somebody has to, be the loser, and that maybe at the moment, if we said that might be the view that is higher ed. For us to win I won't continue, but you get the idea, somebody has to take the responsibility, the blame, and go forward. And so that I don't think is particularly constructive, but it may be the dominant view of our moment in the world. And so how best to thread that needle, I think, is the thing we're talking about here.
I do think that if you look at the data, and yes, you're right, UC Berkeley's acceptance rate has gone down. U of I's enrollment has gone up, passing 100,000 this year. But nationally, the college going rate is in decline. The percentage of kids coming out of high school or choosing to go to college is less than it was 10 years ago. That's on top of a demographic cliff, right, that we're facing. Ruth, you shared last night, I think the statistic in Indiana was those with a valuable credential has decreased from 67% to 50%.
It's people that are pursuing anything after high school from about 66 or 7% to now very close to half. I mean, that's the future workforce. And the other thing is, it's easy to be the one that's winning right now as the flagship and say, we're fine, we're good, but not really, because the public around you is that public who has perceptions of you and beliefs in you and is voting and investing or not. So I think, yes, on the one hand, people are choosing us from enrollment. On the other hand, the world you're in isn't just your campus.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well
And a
said.
lot of institutions are not feeling the same way. And I think we
Right.
are, collectively as a sector, we need to think about the
Right,
overall
that's right.
health
Right.
of all of our institutions in that space. All right, another question. Philanthropy wants to be at the start of the process of the opportunity, and there needs to be a relationship already in place. I think this maybe goes as a perception of elitism, right? That philanthropy wants there to be there to help, but people don't have a relationship. They feel they can't get in the door. How does one enter that network without having a title or a specific role?
I don't know the answer to that, but that was part of what I was trying to get at around, like,
Call
we have
her.
to structure it in sector-wide. Like, it can't
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
you go and make an individual relationship with each. You know, there has to be some type of forum where these collective, structured relationships happen.
I think you have
But
to
you
look.
do a lot of this.
We
yeah.
do, and we're about as non-elite as they come, right? So, you know, there's no elite, I don't think. My colleague might correct me, but if there is, I'm not aware of it. I think, and pretty open to trying to help whoever comes in our path, which is probably part of being an earlier phase organization. I do think the thing that everybody can do is say, what does this organization say they do? And then look for the places of match and priority. Because what it's hardest is
Yes.
people will come to you with pretty good ideas. I feel like my job is to help them find a place to be successful. It might not necessarily be me or us, but it will help make that introduction. And I think some of what you do can come through that. But I think also, you know, really doing a little bit of testing and interrogating. But I don't think there are many of us who are not looking for titles or, I mean, we are looking for, is there alignment with an idea? And is there potential? And to some extent, is there a commitment to measuring? Because I think without some potential that this idea could go to scale. Those are probably things that we are looking for. If there's not a genuine commitment to measurement or an idea that could potentially scale, that will be a tough fit.
Yeah, I just want to double down. Like, this might sound elitist, but like, I'm sure you guys get, we get like hundreds of people reaching out, and to your point, like, how realistic is it that I'm going to talk to everybody? If I had time, I would. I love talking, but I want to just double click on your, like, know what the organization does. Like, oftentimes people will be pitching to us, like, to do direct service things or research things that we're not focused on. It's like, you could just look at the webpage and know that that probably isn't. So maybe just knowing what the organization is doing, the foundation or philanthropy, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. But this is also why federal funding sources matter a lot, because you need to have places where they're not actually operating relationally, where you
Yeah,
can have
that's a good
access to
point.
dollars with an open RFP
Yeah.
and a good idea where review happens blind. Like, it's a
Yeah.
really important part of our ecology that has been dismantled in a lot of ways.
Yeah. it's a
And
good
so private philanthropy has a particular function and a particular set of skills and talents, and we need multiple parts of the philanthropic sector to be robust.
All right, I want to end on a note of hope as we move forward. So I'm going to shift the question a little bit. This will be our final question. But we've talked a lot about challenges today facing higher education, rising distrust, rising concerns about affordability, sometimes the inability to collaborate. But what gives you hope or optimism about the future for higher education? Nalia, I haven't picked on you first, so I'll let you.
I mean, I'm young people. Young people give me hope. And on one hand, these Gen Z, whatever they drive me absolutely nuts. They keep asking me for raises when they just got there. Like, but I will say, they hold society to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And I actually have great hope that what appears sometimes to me to look like entitlement is actually insistence on having the things that we need and not taking no for an answer. So I think that I'm hopeful about what they will create. and all that self-care, they want to center humans. It's going to be good, I think.
Work-life balance, right?
The self-care, yeah. I was going to say young people too, but I'll say something. I would double click on that. I would also say that, like, despite sort of Debbie Downer, like, I actually do see a lot of really innovative and cool things, and higher ed responding, like, in positive ways. Not like, oh God, we're being pushed into it, but like in positive ways that seem genuine and like, we're here to help. I just feel like there's an energy of we're part of the solution here. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I honestly feel like it, and it wasn't just before they came under attack. I feel like it's been going on for a long time. Like, yeah, this is a democracy. We all have, you need higher ed to function as a democracy. So I feel like higher ed actually has responded in a positive way, and that gives me hope.
And I think the optimistic element is a lot of the solutions that have evidence behind them, we know what they are, and they are doable and within our grasp.
Yeah.
And so we know things that change lives and transform them. What we have not been so good at is making sure that the people who will benefit most and need the most are actually getting them, instead of the people who need them the least. So I think that gives me great hope. Because we know what to do now, we have to figure out how to do it and to do it at scale.
Love it. I'm going to invite my colleague back on stage. In the meantime, please join me in thanking our colleagues for a wonderful conversation.